based on all accounts, it just seems like Ben, dating back to his days at LSU, probably even before then, just doesn't seem receptive to constructive criticism. Well, let's just get right into it. Mort, the simmering tension of the Ben Simmons trade saga has finally reached a boil, as Keith Pompey of the Philadelphia Inquirer first reported Tuesday, and Derek Bodner of The Athletic has later confirmed. Ben Simmons met with the Sixers last week. He met with, I think it was Daryl Morey, Doc Rivers, Josh Harris, the team co-managing partner. Basically told them he wants out. He does not want to be in Philadelphia anymore, and he does not plan to report to training camp. There were mixed reports from the same reporter about whether Tyrese Maxey would also get wrapped up in that. It sounds like at first he said Rich Paul wanted both of these guys out. Then he backtracked on that and said Rich Paul's actually fine with Tyrese Maxey staying in Philly, so we can remove that. Thankfully, that was a whole Tuesday night saga right there. But by all accounts, Ben Simmons is done playing in Philly.
Yes.
The only problem is he's under contract for 4 more years at $146 million, fully guaranteed. So, Mort, what do you think the Sixers do here? Do you think they're under more pressure to trade him now that this request has become public, knowing the training camp is coming up in a couple weeks?
No, I mean, I understand that training camp is going to add a level of pressure to the situation, but I don't think overall it should allow the Sixers to be pressured because of it. I think they need to focus on getting the best return that they can get. Whatever that is, though, see, that's the thing, Brian. That's where I'm stuck. I just have no clue anymore. I have no clue what Ben Simmons' trade value is. I have no clue what kind of offers are legitimately out there. I have no clue what the expectation is moving forward from external teams. It's just such a wonky situation. We did Mark Schindler's podcast the other day, and one of the things that we talked about there was Ben Simmons, and one of the things that I noted was it's so difficult to also trade an in-prime player when you're looking for an in-prime player.
Mm-hmm.
Normally in the NBA, if you're trading an in-prime player, it's because you as an organization are starting to pivot into a rebuild, like you're just realizing this isn't working out, we're trading, or maybe you're actually accelerating and then you're trading everyone around that in-prime player to actually compete for a championship. The Sixers are in a win-now situation. They have a win-now player in Ben Simmons, and they can't pivot to youth because that doesn't make any sense. So you're looking to actually convince a team out there that, hey, you can get Ben Simmons, an in-prime player. We'll get your in-prime player, but you'll be better. But we'll be better too.
Right.
That doesn't really compute, and I think that has not exactly aided this entire process. I shouldn't have used the word process right there, but yeah. So it's very muddy is kind of my point here. You can't really figure out if there's a team out there that's actually willing to give up a secondary star that is comparable to Simmons. So I want to throw it back to something you said a couple months ago, Brian, when you said, let's stop focusing on Ben Simmons as a trade asset or trade value. Let's just instead try to figure out a fit. Let's find a package where you optimize fit, and even if you sacrifice on the bottom line just in terms of talent and quality, then you can make that up by getting someone in there who's a better fit, like CJ McCollum, Malcolm Brogdon, that type of player. So I think that has to be the solution. But in terms of whether or not the Sixers should be in a rush now because of training camp, I don't think so. I don't think that helps them at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think if there were a 2-team framework that made sense, it would already be done. So I think it's going to end up being a 3 or 4 team deal, just because, as you said, the teams that want Ben Simmons, we've heard Minnesota, John Krasinski of The Athletic has reported that they seem the most of any team. They really, really want Ben Simmons, but they don't want to give up Karl Anthony Towns. They don't want to give up Anthony Edwards, and they apparently don't even want to give up D'Angelo Russell. So
yeah, that's going to be tough then.
Right. And, they have Malik Beasley, they have Torian Prince for salary matching, they have Jaden McDaniels, they can offer a boatload of picks. But as you said, Philly is in a win now window. So, Beasley could help with that. But the picks and McDaniels aren't going to help Joel Embiid in his prime win a championship next year.
Right.
So can you parlay all of that into something else or send that package to another team that can send a win now player back to Philly? I think that's probably the thing that would make sense for all sides. You brought up how it's hard for another win now or another team with a win now player. I think that was why CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons was the most popular framework. Like as soon as this all started, just everyone was like, all right, just pull the trigger on CJ for Ben. But as I wrote at Forbes this week, all of the focus on Ben Simmons' shortcomings in the playoffs, which are completely valid and we can't discount them. Like as much as Doc Rivers tried to gaslight all of us into pretending they didn't matter, they do. His limitations on offense become such a liability in the playoffs that I don't know. Doc said, I don't know if he's a championship level point guard. And I think that's a fair criticism of Ben at this point. But he does bring a lot of other good stuff to the table, especially in the regular season. He is their primary defender. He's one of the most versatile defenders in the NBA.
Yes.
He's a great playmaker, especially in transition. He's been responsible for the second most threes of anyone in the NBA in terms of just three-pointers assisted over the last 3 seasons.
Correct.
So if the Sixers trade this guy, they're going to have to replace a lot. And maybe that means Matisse Thybulle moves into the starting lineup to take up some of the defensive responsibility. Like they have some options here, but it's not like they can just trade Ben Simmons for a picks-heavy package and say, okay, well, we're not losing all that much in terms of on-court value. Like despite all of Ben's flaws, he does bring a lot of value to the Sixers, especially in the regular season when teams aren't as locked in defensively and he can, get to his spots more easily than he can in the playoffs when teams can develop specific game plans and really hone in on your weaknesses.
Right.
So I'm of the mindset, like I've been saying all offseason, they were going to shop him. I was skeptical that they were going to trade him. I've been saying like I'm 50-50 on whether he shows up, whether he's still on the roster at training camp. And a lot of Sixers fans didn't want to hear that and got mad every time I said it. But I'm still there. Like I don't think this trade request becoming public, this was like the next obvious step in this saga. But I don't think Daryl Morey's like, oh no, okay, well now I'm going to take Buddy Hield and Marvin Bagley and that's it.
Agreed. Yeah, that would be pretty disappointing if he did. Yes.
Yeah. I think this is Morey knows he has to nail this move because this is really the last big play he can make in terms of potentially upgrading talent. I mean, they messed up a lot over the past few years and ran the cupboard a little bit dry compared to where Hinkie left them when he left in 2016. So this is Morey's big shot to, okay, we're going to either get, Damian Lillard is the dream.
Yeah.
Which, by all accounts does not sound like it's going to happen prior to training camp. He wants to give them a chance at least. So Morey either has to, abandon the Dame dream and just, as you said, go for a better fitting package that you're not hoping to later flip down the line for something else. Or if he's really that committed to the Dame dream, just got to live with the awkwardness with Ben Simmons for a little bit.
Well, I mean, even if he does live with Ben Simmons for a little bit, it's no guarantee that Dame is going to be available. Look, I'm going to say something that may sound a little bit ridiculous, but I don't even know fully if that CJ deal is on the table anymore. I assume it is. But given that Larry Nance is now there, look, I'm not saying Larry Nance is going to move the needle towards making Portland a championship contender. But you and I talked about that deal recently, and we love it. We love it for Portland. This is a guy who could unlock so many things for them. I wouldn't be shocked to see them also expecting Robert Covington to have a bounce back year, in which case Bryan, they might be in the thick of things in the playoff picture, because the West has gotten a little bit worse over the past year.
Yeah.
And like, it's fair game in the Western Conference right now. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Dame play throughout the entire season with the Blazers, not being available for a trade whatsoever, which just begs the question then, where does that leave Philly and Ben Simmons? And look, again, if that includes CJ McCollum not being available as well, then where do you pivot to, Bryan? If you're the Sixers, then what is your next goal? Where do you go to find something? All right, then you go to Minnesota, then you go that whole wonky route where you say, well, we want some of your guys, but we don't want all of them. So we reroute some of them, and then it becomes this thing where you're kind of scouring through the league for a fourth team, and then maybe you like some of the players on the third team, but not all of them, so you have to get a fourth team involved. It's just gonna get clunky. This was a very long-winded way of saying, if CJ McCollum is on the table, Bryan, I probably just don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the argument for it. I think if I'm the Sixers, I would use these two things to give me pause before I hit okay on any Ben Simmons trade that does not involve Damian Lillard.
Hit me. All right. What?
We've talked about the Wizards and Bulls this offseason, how the upgrades they've made probably have made it less likely that Bradley Beal or Zach LaVine leave. I think Zach is almost certain to stay with the Bulls at this point.
Yeah, I am too.
I don't know if Beal is or isn't, but I would assume Beal is looking at that Wizards team much more optimistically than he was 3 months ago when they got pasted in the first round. And, it seemed like they were stuck with the Russell Westbrook albatross for 2 more years. So
it'd be crazy not to. Yes.
Yeah. So, and you look beyond those two guys at next year's free agent class, and it is brutal, man. Like, all of these extensions, a Julius Randle, a Terry Rozier, a Marcus Smart, even Josh Richardson, Robert Williams, all these guys signing extensions have really depleted that free agent class outside of Beal and LaVine. It's like Aaron Gordon is one of the best players on the market, and he is even reportedly nearing an extension. So
start Aaron Gordon at point guard for the Philadelphia.
They basically are already. But, I think you could, if you're Philly and all these teams are trying to plan ahead for their next move, you could point to next year's free agent market and say, like, look, that move isn't out there, at least in free agency. You could try to get a restricted free agent maybe, but there's no guarantee you're actually going to be able to get one. Right. So I think that if you're, if teams are like positioning for what's our next move, what's the big splash that we're going to make, it's like Ben Simmons might be your best bet for the next year or two. So I think that's probably the card I would be playing if I'm Daryl Morey. I think the problem for him, as the report came out about Maxey, is if you do try to call Simmons bluff, like, he's under contract. If he doesn't show up for training camp, you can fine him for holding out. If you do so, Ben Simmons is represented by Rich Paul of Clutch Sports. Rich Paul is a very powerful agent who has a very impressive clientele, including Tyrese Maxey. You do not want to piss this guy off, because if you do, it could come back to bite you with Maxey contract negotiations in a couple of years. It could come back to bite you, if you're trying to trade for another player or trying to sign another player in free agency. So it's a difficult tightrope to walk for Morey, where you don't want to sell Ben Simmons for 40 cents on the dollar at this point, which sounds like would be the case, especially after this trade request. But you also have to be mindful of all of the other dynamics at play here.
Yeah. So the agent part is definitely relevant. It's also difficult because we are seeing a world wherein the NBA agents are having more control than ever before. We're seeing NBA players and agents rather just basically become more important than NBA teams themselves. I mean, this wasn't the case just 15 years ago. There, the powers to be was the league and NBA teams, and if you were under contract, you were under contract, and you had to obey all that. Then came player empowerment, which I'm a big proponent of players also getting a bigger say in where they play and all that. So I don't have any qualms with it, but I do think it is beginning to reach a point where I think NBA teams are going to be a little bit hesitant to work with agents because of this, and I wouldn't be shocked to see this if this thing evolves where Rich Paul says let's take Maxey out of the equation, he shouldn't return to the Sixers as well. Then I could see that having a very negative effect around the league. Although I get it, I get it from Clutch Sports' perspective. I get it, you're trying to leverage a situation for one of your biggest clients, one of your biggest brand name clients, no less than Ben Simmons. I understand the strategy of play here, but how do you come out of this, both as the agency and the team, without long-term issues? I think that's a larger and larger question that needs answering, because if just one of those sides are pissed off at one another, that could have a pretty long-lasting effect in how you construct an NBA roster. Yeah.
If we have a lockout in 2 years, I think this situation in particular is going to come up as one of the main reasons why. Because if someone with 4 years left on it, 4 guaranteed years left on his contract, can request a trade and force his team's hand to trade him, teams are going to be like, what's the point of having multi-year guaranteed contracts?
And it's a fair question.
Maybe it's just a boomer take from me, but I do think that's we're approaching that point. There is a difference between Anthony Davis trying his power play with 1 year left on his deal, where he's saying, okay, you know what, I want out of New Orleans, I'm not going to re-sign with you when I become a free agent. That's not an option for Ben. He's under contract for 4 more years. You don't have power, so he's trying to leverage whatever power he does have, but ultimately it's not very much right now.
I don't think it's a boomer take, but so here's the thing. I see it from both sides. I think agents are leveraging the ever-living hell out of player empowerment, and I get it. It would be ridiculous not to. At the same time, though, these players are getting paid these hundreds of millions of dollars by their NBA team. That is the entire point of it. That is that they are compensated very, very well for their work. And when they make a commitment, they, the team also makes a commitment, but the player does as well. So the player, understanding the business, says, I'll sign for 5 years or 4 years. What did Ben sign for? 5 years, right? Yeah. Okay, one of them has passed. So, and then the counter argument to that is, well, it's only a commitment from the player side because the team has trading power, which is true. So what do? Do you limit trade flexibilities? Do you put something in, instead of no trade clauses, do you put some type of language in there that makes it more complicated to conduct trades so players feel earnestly that they are being devoted to by the team? I don't know, but it's something we'll have to figure out. I think, and the reason I spend so much time talking about the agency part here is I think this Ben Simmons situation is, like you said, Bryan, is going to play a role not just over the next month or so. I think if this thing goes south, it's going to be a thing we're going to be talking about for the next 2 years. So I really want to flesh that out and say, we should all pay attention to what's going on, both from the agent side, from the player side, from the organization side. There are a lot of ruling powers right now that are at play going up against each other. And that could shape how down the line the NBA is frankly, controlled, engineered. So, I think it's relevant.
Very much agreed there. So this will not be our last Ben Simmons update, but we will see what happens and how Morey and Clutch and Ben and everyone manages themselves over the next couple weeks. Because there have been instances. This is a cross-sport comparison, but Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles was in very similar shoes earlier this year, where he was like, I want out. I have no intention of coming back. And he gives a press conference this week where he's like, no, I'm good now. We mended fences. I want to retire here. And then he said something along the lines of people were urging me to burn bridges, and I'm just not that type of guy. Clearly Ben is choosing a different path here, but I don't think any situation is ever past the point of completely no return. So
Well, I think there are a few. I think there are certain situations, but it has to be so extreme. Like, for example, Latrell Sprewell back in the day. PJ Carlissimo, stuff like that. But you're right. And I think this is why we talk about head coaches and general managers as CEOs now. Like, they have to have those communication skills. They have to be able to sit down with their players and say, you know what? There has been some weird communication back and forth. There's been some cross messaging. There's been some misunderstandings. Let's talk. Let's figure stuff out. We see some of the best teams in the NBA are the best teams because of it. When the Spurs were very, very relevant. Remember when LaMarcus Aldridge wanted out, and then Pop was like, no. Let's have a conversation. And then I don't know if they went to dinner or something, but they had a long conversation. And then afterwards, Aldridge was like, I'm ready for a contract extension. Like, let's get it done. So there's merit in going that route of communication. If Ben isn't interested in that, that's a shame, I think, because ultimately they could agree to something where they say, you know what, we're devoted to you for the rest of this year. Well, at the same time, we're looking for trades. Like, let's help each other. Help me, help you, and you help me, help us. Like, figure out where you want to play, what kind of returns that are out there. Let's work together, because if you sit in a locker room, or not even a locker room, you wouldn't even be in the arena, but if you sit at home, sulking while we go out and try to stay above 500, none of us are gonna come out of it.
Right. Yeah, like, just play the good soldier and it could help all of us. Play this good soldier and, like, attempt 1-3 per game. So teams know that you could actually do it in an NBA game and not just in an empty gym during the off season. That would help.
But it goes both ways. Like, I get what you're saying. I just hate the phrase, soldier in that sense, because I also think the organization has to be a soldier for the player. I really think it goes both ways. Like, you have to be on the same page. Like, it has to be one of those things where the organization also committed to doing right by Ben by saying, you know what, you're out there playing. That's what we want you to do. And in the meantime, we are working the phones. We are helping you reach a new place. I mean, it has to be a 50-50 situation. Otherwise, you'll never move forward.
I will say this as the final note. Based on the reporting about, like, Doc Rivers' comments after Game 7 and their relationship being irreparably damaged, if that's the case, I was in, not every press conference by any means, but I was in a lot of them this year.
Yeah, you were.
Doc Rivers ardently defended Ben Simmons against basically all criticism all year. Like, repeatedly, anytime someone brought up his shooting or his lack thereof, which again became an issue in the playoffs, Doc just said, you're missing the picture. Focus on everything else he does. He's a great player, incredible, awesome, blah, blah, blah. Like, tape for him is DPOY, everything. He says one thing after Game 7, which I don't even think, if you, like, based on the context, he was asked, can he be a championship level point guard? And he said, I don't know. And I don't think he's saying, like, he can't be a championship level player. Right. He's saying point guard, which, as you know, that player typically, if you have the ball in your hands that much, you have to be able to create on your own. That's just the modern NBA. So, I don't necessarily think it's a wrong critique of him. And just, based on all accounts, it just seems like Ben, dating back to his days at LSU, probably even before then, just doesn't seem receptive to constructive criticism. So I don't know if there's a way for them to really have a productive relationship moving forward. I think, this thing is so far gone at this point that they are going to have to trade him at some point. I don't see a scenario in which they mend fences and everyone's happy and Ben Simmons plays out the rest of his career in Philly. But I also don't necessarily know that they're going to have to trade him by, I think camps open September 28th. Right.
No, they should.
I don't know that there will be a resolution by then, but I do expect one at some point this season. I don't think, if Dame waits until next offseason to request for a trade, there's almost no way they can go into the playoffs next season with Ben Simmons still on the roster.
I would agree with that.